Welcome to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Liz White. She is the Executive Director of One Virginia 2021, the foundation, as well as the original organization, One Virginia 2021, which was formed in 2014 for the express purpose of bringing redistricting to Virginia that is not based on the General Assembly drawing the district lines every 10 years when we have a new census. So we have now passed that, and Liz is spearheading the effort to get more people across the Commonwealth of Virginia to engage with this commission in helping to draw the new district lines. So here to help better explain all of this is the real expert in the room, Liz White. Thank you so much, Liz, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. This is great. Any exposure we can get for redistricting is a help.
So the Constitution of Virginia was amended, which is not a simple process. It's complex. It takes 3 years, and there's a reason for that. You don't want to willy-nilly just amend your Constitution. So give us a little background about, the various people who came together recognizing that fairer elections depended on a fairer process.
Sure. So since the beginning, since the early rumblings of One Virginia 2021, back in the beginning of the decade, leaders from across the state and across the political spectrum came together, put aside political differences, and agreed that politicians shouldn't choose their voters. It should be the other way around. And they hired staff, built this network, and we've spent the better part of this last decade educating Virginians about redistricting and why it matters and why it's not just a remnant of your 7th grade civics class, and working with the General Assembly towards a solution that would take the process out of the hands of just legislators and give a lot of the power to the public of Virginia. We realized early on real change was going to mean a constitutional amendment. And until last year, all the Constitution said about redistricting was that it had to happen every 10 years, and the districts had to be compact, contiguous, and of equal population. And all of that was pretty vague and subject to interpretation. So in 2019, we passed what would become the amendment through the General Assembly for the first time. As you mentioned, it's not an easy or a short process, and it has to pass again through the General Assembly 2 years in a row, can't even change a comma. So passed again in 2020, went on the ballot, and then this past November, it passed with a 2-to-1 margin in every locality in Virginia except for one. And Virginians overwhelmingly have been clamoring for this, even if they didn't know a lot about the issue. As soon as they learn about it, it doesn't take long for them to realize that the way it had been done before was intrinsically unfair. And that there had to be a better way.
So yes, and so we should mention for our viewers that this is every 10 years. Every time the U.S. does a census, it gives back to the states data about who lives where, because the fact that they have to be of the same population. So the districts, if it's 80,000 people or 100,000 people per district, the lines have to be drawn roughly around that population. But in the Commonwealth of Virginia, in the rural part of the state, that could include several counties. In Northern Virginia, which is densely populated, we're carving up towns along, these district lines. And so you're right, legislators were basically drawing for incumbency. They wanted to protect their seats. And so the average Virginia voter understood that this was not necessarily the best way to get a district where there was impact in voting. I guess we should also mention, Liz, that we were subject to pre-clearance as a southern state.
Right. And that pre-clearance was a provision in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Certain states with dicey histories with how they treated people based on race were subject to federal pre-clearance based when they wanted to pass a law that would impact voting. It had to get okayed by the federal government. That provision of the Voting Rights Act was struck down by the Supreme Court in 2013. But what is left in the Voting Rights Act that still impacts us today is a prohibition, a federal prohibition on racial gerrymandering. You cannot draw a district that's going to disenfranchise a racial, ethnic, or language block. And that we have now passed legislation in Virginia that doubles down on that and reinforces that. And those redundant protections are in our Constitution now, which is great in case more parts of the federal law are struck down in the future.
I think the other thing that kind of shook people up, whether you really understood what happened in 2010 or not, is that very sophisticated software was introduced in 2010, so that when the lines were redrawn, based on what grocery store you went to, what kind of magazine subscriptions came to your address, they could tell pretty much who was a Republican and who was a Democrat. So this raised drawing districts in 2010 all across the United States to a whole nother level, as far as the party in charge of the legislature being able to identify how best to draw districts to protect their incumbency. And so that was a real alarm bell in 2010, which is why One Virginia 2021 by 2013, 2014 was like, wow, House is on fire. House is on fire. And so with this commission, what we're talking about is communities of interest. And this, and when you say this is not going to be districts based on, what household identifies one way or another politically, then the question is, aside from geography and aside from, population that is roughly equal, how are we going to decide where lines get drawn? And this is where if the general public, if the average Virginia voter is not part of the process, then how is the commission going to know what you believe is a community of interest where you live?
Yes. So the General Assembly this past year passed legislation establishing the criteria that the commission has to use to draw the maps, in addition to what was already in the constitutional amendment. And one of the big things is that they are now legally required to consider communities of interest. And the definition of community of interest is pretty broad. You can really define it. I mean, any geographically contiguous group that has common interests. So that might mean different things in different parts of the state, or even different parts of a county or a district. It might be a racial, ethnic, or language minority. It might be a school district. It might be city lines. It might truly be a locality. It might be people with the similar economic interests. There's so many ways to interpret it, and it's different everywhere. And this commission, it's 16 people. They can't possibly know, even with all the time in the world, they can't possibly be familiar with every community in Virginia unless we help them. So we all have to take this opportunity to tell them about our community of interest. And these communities don't have to be big. It doesn't have to be a group that then would have its own district or even be a majority in a district. But if it's a group with common interests who could work together to improve their community or further their interests, carving them up is harmful. Then they lose any kind of influence that they would have. And they can't really further their agenda at all. So
some of the things, because I went to you guys hosted a number of presentations around Virginia while this whole process was going on, and commissioners came from California. And, there are other states we should mention who've been doing this for a long time. We're not inventing this way of drawing districts, but this model that Virginia has is unique among other models. And so California was talking about looking at places that were like agriculturally based, where there was a lot of farming, others where there was deep sea ports, and we have some of those things, same things in Virginia. Mm-hmm. What about communities that rely on tourism? What about, agriculture? We have coal country.
And the Eastern Shore is a great example. You have the Eastern Shore, who they're obviously a community, but they're not big enough to fit into to fill a district. So do you put them with other parts of the state that are similarly based in agriculture, or do you put them with Norfolk because it's easier to get there from the Eastern Shore? And the answer is we don't know, but you know who does? The people who live in the Eastern Shore. So it's up to us to tell the commission what we need out of our communities and what they need to consider in drawing these maps. This new system has created all of this space for public input and for the public voice. And it is up to all of us as Virginians to fill that. And it's up to groups like One Virginia 2021 who are working on this. And we're certainly not the only ones, but groups like us to create as many opportunities for that as possible.
And so those are, and we're going to get to that a little later in the show about where those opportunities exist and the fact that you can show up in person or you can participate remotely. But before you even think about like, okay, well, I'm going to show up to this hearing and see what's going on, think about who your communities of interest are. And I think this is something that people have not really sat down and thought about, the fact that when you send an elected representative to the General Assembly, to the House and to the Senate, or your statewide elected officers, or to Congress, your congressperson, is that you expect them to do something that benefits your community. And you are part of many, many different kinds of communities. Like maybe you're part of the disability community. Maybe you're part of a community like the Korean American community, which is very large here in Virginia. You kind of want representatives who understand the needs of specific communities because they're representing you. So I hope people are thinking in terms of, well, if I could like think of a representative or what that representative would understand about where I live and what our community needs. More funding for education, better roads, support for agriculture or bringing manufacturing back. I mean, you can think of a lot of different ways in which it's like a representative needs to represent all these different communities when they go to make good policy and good legislation. And so
intact communities of interest also help educate the legislator about their community, even if it's something they haven't experienced firsthand. Their relationship with their constituents is just stronger, and they're in a better position to really help.
I agree, and so looking at how this is beneficial to every single person who lives here is the key to being motivated to be part of this solution. You're being invited. Everyone is invited. It doesn't matter. You could be a high school student. Get your club together to look at. There's things on your site, resources for how it works, how to look at different districts. Anyone can bring their community, look at the tools, and participate. But we're going to go to a break real quick, and when we come back, we're going to talk about this further. You're watching Your Need to Know.
As they head toward the finish, Warren has built a substantial lead and headed for her 4th gold medal.
She's ahead of the world record pace by at least half a second, and oh, wait, what's she doing?
I think she's doing a headstand. Why would she do that?
She's stopping. She stopped.
I've never seen
She was so close to the finish, and she stopped. I mean, this is unbelievable. Yeah, I've never.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill, bring good home.
Freedom. It's at the core of who we are. The freedom to live without fear, to jog where we please, to wear a hoodie. The freedom to breathe. Before we celebrate the freedom most Americans have, we must fight for the freedom all Americans deserve. Because all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
Hey, Sanjay.
Hey, Rosie. Good to see you. What's going on?
So I'm going to hit you up for some medical advice, if that's okay that I use you a little bit here.
Yeah, of course. Use me.
Okay, say someone already had COVID, right?
That person would still need to get the vaccine.
Okay, Sanjay, you're like really scary right now. You're like a mind reader, but yeah, that was my question.
Even if you've already had COVID, you still need to get vaccinated. And Rosie, keep wearing a mask.
Always. Thanks, Sanjay. You're the best.
Welcome back to Your Need to Know. I'm your host, Catherine Reed, and tonight we're talking with Liz White. She is the executive director of One Virginia 2021, and she is one of a number of organizations who is working to help Virginians understand how to engage in our redistricting. Legislation passed in 2020. The voters overwhelmingly amended our Virginia Constitution to have more community citizen input into how districts are drawn every 10 years. And we are at that time now. So, Liz, I'm going to pitch it over to you to talk a little bit about the unusual circumstances, too, of the pandemic having made the census data late. We and us in New Jersey, Virginia, New Jersey, have off year governor elections, so we get the census data before everybody else gets it. We're always first to get it, but it didn't matter this year because it's been delayed. So just talk a little bit about how it could be a kind of a benefit that we have this little extra time now that we have this new commission.
Sure. So the census delay because of COVID means that when we, as you said, we and New Jersey would usually get everything first. It would be, early spring, late winter, and we would have had maps drawn along, a couple months ago. Often it takes a little bit longer. You got to move legislative primaries back to August, but you still have time to get everything done. Now there's been so many delays that they are not getting us the data until next month. August 16th is the projected day, but mid-August is when everybody's going to get their census data. So we can't draw anything without the census data. So I agree there's been a little bit of it's certainly the silver lining of this delay is that we have a brand new process, and this has given the commissioners, the staff, and the public a little extra time to kind of get our feet under us and figure out what we need to know to make this work well and how to get involved to make it work well. The commissioners really had some extra time to become redistricting experts because a lot of them most of them don't come from that background, but they do represent Virginia. So yeah, there's definitely been a silver lining giving us a little extra time to try to make this new process work well.
And to that end, there's been lots of hearings because the one thing that the pandemic did was make things remote. And, if this had happened at a different time where all the meetings were in person, it would have been much more difficult for people to participate. But that's not how it worked out. Now we're all Zoomers. I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty much sure all of us are kind of tired of Zooming everything. But in this particular instance, it ended up being a silver lining that all of the meetings, right from the get-go, when they were deciding who was going to be on the commission and how the process was going to work, anybody who wanted to be part of that could tune in. And that is still being retained. So in addition to being able to show up for a hearing, you can also Zoom in on a meeting and you can testify or you can just listen. So tell us a little bit about how that's being set up, because there's one coming up here in Northern Virginia on July 27th, and we really want to make sure people know how they can engage with that.
Yeah, so there's ever since the beginning, everything, as you said, has been Zoomed, live streamed. There is an unprecedented level of transparency built into the new system through the constitutional amendment, as well as through some legislation. And every step of the way is live streamed, is open to the public, is recorded and archived, and is subject to the Freedom of Information Act. We just have this huge level of access to a process that's historically been, the epitome of the smoky back room. And yeah, the fact that it's virtual is very helpful. Virginia is certainly not the biggest state, but we're not tiny. And there's, some far-flung communities who've historically been ignored by this process. And folks there are now able to more easily participate. The commission meetings are just now in person as of July 1st. And those are now treated like General Assembly meetings where you have to participate in person. But the hearings are starting. They're getting started this month, and they are all over the state. They're both in-person events and virtual events. And even in the in-person events, you are able to testify virtually, and everything, like I said, is live streamed. The commission has a YouTube channel. If you go on our website, there's a link to that. And any of the links on our website that say, click here to view the live stream, it is all that YouTube link. It's all in one place. It's pretty easy to navigate. But the levels of access, I think, to these meetings is just, it's historic. It truly is. And everyone can hear what everyone else says. Anyone who emails a comment to the commission, it's posted on the website, which I think is also nice to see what other people are saying about your community. And you can kind of go, oh, yeah, it might jog your memory. It might make you, or maybe you go, that's not true. Either way, I think it's nice to know you're not alone in your outreach to the commission. It's nice to see that other regular people who are not mapping experts, they're not political experts, they're not in any academic way an expert in their community. You still know your community. You still know what affects your life and your neighbors' lives and your friends' lives. And seeing that, I think, helps remind everybody and reduces that threshold anxiety a little bit and makes everybody a little more willing to participate. And that's what we're hoping.
Right. And so the one in Northern Virginia is July 27th, which is a Tuesday. Yeah. And it's going to be in person at Dewberry Hall, which is downstairs in the Johnson Center at George Mason University. And there's a parking garage right there next to the Fine Arts Center. So, and then, the campus, the students aren't there right now. So plenty of parking, and you just walk to the Johnson Center and you go downstairs, and Dewberry Hall is right there. Or you can,
it's at 4 o'clock.
It's at 4 o'clock, and you can show up in person. And something, here's the thing. You don't have to say anything. If you just want to come and observe, come and observe. Same with logging on. You can sign up to speak. If you're going to sign up virtually to speak, there is a deadline of Monday at
4, at 24 hours in advance.
Yeah, if you have something you want to say virtually. But you can just listen and get an idea from what other people are saying as to, okay, so now I kind of better understand what kind of information people are bringing or what kind of information people are talking about. And so I have a better idea how to go back to the different communities I belong to suggest that maybe we get together and look at how to represent what we believe is our community. So here in Fairfax City, and I live in Fairfax City, we are wholly in one House district, David Boliva's. We're wholly in one Senate district, that is Chat Peterson. We are wholly in one congressional district, which is Jerry Connolly. But lots of other places are not. When we had Matt Savage, who is the head of the Virginia Young Democrats, on the show, he was talking about Marshall High School is represented by 12 different electeds. So the students who go there, their families are represented by 3 different congressional districts and by multiple senators and multiple House members. Well, that should give you an idea that the families of Marshall High School are a community of interest. And why are they represented in 12 different people? So that's just one idea of how to think about what you want to bring to the commission to say, this is a consideration for a community that I belong to. So, what are some other ways that you've got social sites, there's lots of ways people can follow along.
So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. All those links are available on our website, which is One Virginia, spelled out, 2021, onevirginia2021.org. And on our homepage right now, because we are focused on casting this wide net for public feedback, there are 4 different kind of categories of ways to get involved. And you can show up at these public hearings or virtually or in person. We have FAQs on there. We've got tips on how to testify effectively. We are happy to help you in any way we can. You can provide written comment. There's an email address for the entire commission on the website. And there's also a form you can use where you just fill in what you want them to know, and it'll automatically send that off to the commission and each commissioner. You can go online and use one of these free online tools to draw your community of interest. If you're a visual person, or you just really feel strongly that it is your school district or your city, or you just know, no, I think my neighborhood ends at the Wendy's. I mean, truly, that is the level of knowledge that is enough to define your community. You can go on these sites and draw your map if you want a visual representation. We have training videos on the site if that sounds a little daunting. They're very user-friendly. And we also accept, if you want to talk into your cell phone for 60 seconds and record a video and tell the commission about your community, we've got a way for you to do that. There's a lot of ways that you can tell the commission what they need to know. And I think it's just important to remember that these maps can only be as good and as representative as the information they receive from us.
Those are all excellent points. And something else I would point out, this lasts for 10 years. So these districts will be with us for 10 years. So since 2010, if you think about places, for instance, like Loudoun County, where there's been so much development, so many new neighborhoods going up that self-identify, like I live in the Broadlands, or I live in Ashburn Village, or these communities that are densely populated with a lot of families. And the lines were drawn 10 years ago. And so a lot has changed. The population continues to grow in Northern Virginia. And the denser it is as you get toward Washington, D.C., the more communities like Culmore, it's a small place, but it's got a lot of people in it. So when people we talk about Culmore, it's not Bailey's Crossroad. Well, only the people that live there know that. So you have to bring
I don't know anything about that.
Right.
I need someone to tell me.
You have to bring that to the commission and go, these two places are different. So don't get confused and think they're the same. And so these are just ideas about how to start to think about where you live, or even if it's not where you live, just to understand your county. Or the part of you live in Western Fairfax County and you understand that there's a large Korean community out in the Centerville area, but there's all these different communities that reside in a very large geographic space. Well, currently it's represented by different districts. So think to yourself, what can I bring that's helpful? And it's not a graded assignment, right, Liz?
That's right. That's right. Not a graded assignment. You can submit several maps. As Catherine said, you're a part of many communities. You can submit a map for each one and they'll sort it out.
That's right. And no one's judging you. And there's no wrong answers here. There's no wrong answers.
No wrong answers.
There's your opinion, but I will just leave you with this final thought. If you don't participate, you have turned over that responsibility to somebody who may or may not represent districts the way you see them. So don't abdicate responsibility to your neighbor unless you're willing to live with it. Thank you so much, Liz White, for being here. And this is what you need to know.